I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening. Welcome to your own episode of the Teakink podcast.
What a pleasure and what a lecture.
This is M, and M, how would you describe your involvement with the Teakink podcast?
Ooh, avid listener.
How long have you known about it?
Pretty much like since your interview for the Lad Bible.
Oh, okay.
When that was going viral. And I pretty much from the first, maybe even first episode.
Oh, wow.
Like from the very beginning.
Oh.
So yeah, I usually listen to it when I just do a little bit of walking, either around the nature or on the treadmill.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very interesting.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice to hear this story.
Oh, so I put an Instagram question box up asking about if anybody was a fan of the podcast, because I was curious to interview somebody for this new season where I'm interviewing people, because I have a lot of questions myself around it. But so when did you see the Lad Bible interview? Do you remember? Like when it came out, or?
Yeah, I'm not sure what was the space between it came out, but it was definitely when the video of you speaking was going viral on TikTok.
Oh, okay.
So I just sort of watched that video, and pretty much from that short clip, I'm not even sure if I watched the whole interview.
Yeah.
I just went to pretty much, I think you were talking about the podcast. I think you did some type of promotion then, or maybe it was around the same time. And I really started following you through the podcast. So I know that you also engage on other things, but that was pretty much what got me hooked, because I was very interested in kind of how your mind works.
Oh, thank you.
Just finding your stories very interesting to listen to. Yeah.
So when you saw the Lad Bible interview, what did you think?
Oh, I really liked.
Feel free to be as honest as you want.
Oh, yeah.
I can take it.
I'm sure you can. I really enjoyed the way your answers were. You clearly put thought to them before you answered them, but not necessarily on spot. You could tell that you think about those things on a daily basis. So in the moment, it came as very cut to the point, but the point that is not necessarily expected from the get-go.
Okay.
So, the interviewer would ask you something like, oh, do you think 27 is late to get into your profession? And you would be like, I think some people go to their graves, right? Without thinking about it. So you could really tell that you think about those things. And that really got me hooked, because I was like, well, I know that not everybody has the access to education, and not everybody has the time and energy to develop themselves in ways that allows them to articulate themselves. But, I think anybody with a curious mind wants to know what other people are up to, because that's the way you learn about a society. So whether that's, a dominatrix, whether that's a neurosurgeon, whether that's a person who works in the morgue, right? Those little places in the society that might not necessarily be visible, but they still have very strong presence, and quite often, because they're not visible, they're a point of curiosity.
Okay. And from what you know of the episodes, is there anything that's been new for you that you've discovered through them? Or was it pretty,
I think,
relatable?
I think a lot of the things that you said brought me great joy.
Okay.
Especially things that you said around, as a person who for the profession meets a lot of heterosexual men, a lot of men that probably are in positions of power in one way or another, not necessarily, politicians, but just by the wealth that they have, or, just by the picture of being a man
Mm.
of a certain age. And coming from my background, where I used to work in finance for 6 years, and it so happened that it was investments as well, it was a very male-dominated environment. I didn't perform investments myself, but I worked with people who do.
Sorry.
That's okay. Oh, sorry.
Just hair away from that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
It brought me a great joy to hear the same conclusion in a way where it doesn't mean that their voices are not valid, but it means that they're so prominent that it's nice to have more space for female voices or for, queer voices or for people who perhaps haven't been heard as prominently before. Yeah, and the confidence of a woman who grows through her life and does the work to untangle certain social concepts that we learn from early on in our lives.
Would you say that that's something that you work with?
Yeah, I definitely, I took some time off employment because I experienced a mental health breakdown and I spent a whole month in a mental health hospital.
Oh dear,
so
okay.
do feel to call me crazy. What a try.
Yeah.
But, when you experience a moment, it was like extreme insomnia. And obviously when you experience extreme insomnia, then you experience a different sense of reality. And when you experience something like that, and when you see everybody in your professional life suddenly turn away from you, but those people who have been there for you in your private life, being there consistently, regardless of what you go through, and those people not necessarily being in positions that are of reputation or positions that, are sold us as those ideas we should be chasing after, you start to reevaluate
your value system.
Yeah, and you start to question, is the white picket fence really the thing that they market it to be? And for some people, I'm sure it is, but is it for me, right? And, I spend, as a lot of women, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, my late teen years and early 20s, even, to a certain extent, late 20s, catering to the male gaze or catering to just patriarchal society. And when you kind of chewed through that system and spat out on the other side, so in such a cruel way, you kind of like look at it and then you're like, is that
not.
so? Yeah. And I'm sure that you've witnessed a lot of things, especially as a sex worker. I'm sure you have an interesting perspective on, how this society is structured and how you have to navigate it in different ways.
And how we can try to crack it apart.
Yeah. Just shift it a little bit. Just
one client at a time.
I mean, not that I wouldn't love to take a hammer and just like smash it. Realistically, it's more of a Tetris.
Yeah, fair. I guess different people have different approaches, and we need like a combination.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all for the, people, like that's how women got their vote, right? Suffragettes were blowing up, post boxes and frying themselves in front of the horses and all of that. So do rebel. There is a value in that. And
we have to play to our strengths, and mine is apparently talking to a camera. For a very long time.
I'm clearly just captured by you.
Thank you.
So I'm just looking at you.
Did you know about the world of the dominatrix before?
Yeah, I did. I obviously didn't know as much in depth as I got to know about it through your podcast, which I'm very grateful for because it's a really interesting story to tell. I think it's just more of pretty much from teenage years, I've been following people like Dita Pantis, who, sort of worked on the renewal of burlesque and, really throughout her career, I think she obviously got to her shows as well. I've been to her shows, and she also, had some books on fetish and other things. And for that, obviously, I was aware of like different kinks, and that's sort of thing that there is there. And I definitely was curious about that world. I think a lot of people would have that curiosity, but it's really perfect that there is someone like you who is willing to go out there in the world and be brave about it and say, this is how it works, right?
So when I asked you earlier about what it was about what you heard me say or about the podcast in general, you didn't mention actually fetish or sexuality. And from all the feedback that I seem to get, it's exactly what you said. Most people are interested in perspective and in how I am. And it's interesting that, to me at least, I lead with Dominatrix Eva Oh in the title of everything even. And it's such a part of how people perceive me. But it's interesting to hear that the feedback is that that's not the core. And I'm grateful and I'm glad for that, because that was kind of the point. But what aspect does fetish play in this? Are there any particular episodes that you remember, or what are your favorite episodes do you have?
Oh, your fantasy, that was marvelous. By far my favorite. But I also thought that there was something really interesting about it, because, and I think that was also what really drove me to this podcast, was, again, the way your mind works. Because like through that fantasy, of course it's sexual and all that, that's fabulous, we all enjoy our sexuality, hopefully. But the fact that it's mainly about that tension and about the rarity of an encounter. That sort of, in your fantasy it plays out as this world of, in my mind I almost imagine like Mad Max, right? Like a landscape, nothing in the field of vision for miles and miles and miles. Just a bit more sterile version of that,
yes.
like with metal.
I don't need dust in my facility.
Yeah. It's very, very clean. But it's not about that. It's exactly how it works in life. Because we might be, I know that you traveled to Tokyo, I also lived in Tokyo, and I'm just bringing, it can be London, it can be anywhere, but especially in places where there's a lot of people around you, you can be still alone for miles and miles and miles until you come across that rare connection. And a lot of that is about intellectual stimulation and having a connection. Yeah, of course, there's, who would be immune to your allure? Like, come on, be real.
I'm pretty sure some people don't like me.
Yeah. Everybody has their
You have a
taste.
bias.
How could it?
That's why you're here.
But obviously. But no, I think it's.
Yeah.
I think for probably a lot of your audience, what they into people of the same gender, or they open to different encounters with people from different genders, or what they asexual, or they maybe sapiosexual, they attracted to intellect. There's so many things there, but I think what drew me is the story and the way you tell it, and the way your mind works, and kind of like finding points of feeling like that you're relatable in some ways, even though probably some people who listen are in the same profession, but probably to a quite big chunk of your listeners, you in a profession that is quite far removed from them, and yet it's not sexualizing you. We're not sexualizing you, I think, even though obviously like it's part of your work to be sexualized, to perform in a way that is using that idea to promote yourself or to play on certain instincts. But I think especially in the space of the podcast, it doesn't mean that the tone of your voice is not flirtatious or you're not sharing any sexual context like you do, but it's kind of like sitting there with a therapist or with a friend.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think there is this parasocial relationship.
Okay.
Where I think we feel like we know you and like we're kind of, you know, the cooking or shopping or whatever, jogging, and we listen to you and you're there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like being with a friend and listening to a friend. So, like, we're not, I think, I can't speak for everyone, but I think probably a lot of your audience is actually not sexualizing you at all. Not to take away from your attractiveness, obviously, that you're aware of it, but, you know, it's a different thing, right? It's like a respectful thing and the curiosity about your story.
It's interesting because I listen to podcasts that are quite like information heavy, like more like philosophy or like politics sort of podcasts. And I don't feel an affinity for the people so much. But I guess the few times I've listened to the Blind Boy podcast, which is quite personal and varied. And you do feel for these people, right? And because I don't indulge in that connection much, I think it fascinates me, which is also part of the reason why I asked you to come. Because even though it's partially market research, it's also just my lack of understanding as to the value of what I do. Like I want it to have value and I want it to continue to develop on its value. But I guess if I don't have the information on why and how, it's not going to make sense to me, and I won't really know how to proceed. And maybe I'm at that point.
Yeah, I was wondering actually. Yeah. Because you asked me, how do I perceive you as your listener? Yeah. How do you see yourself within that space?
Within the space of the podcast?
Yeah, specifically.
I mean, when I listen back to transcribe and stuff, it's super quickly, and I have a purpose. Have I thought about how I come across? I think because of my work, I'm always thinking about how I come across. And also just being a woman and having to watch your back all the time.
Yep.
But I just try to be as honest as possible. My purpose to do anything public is because I don't see, I enjoy my life, but personally, I don't see enough value in just enjoying it. I see more value when I can contribute to a space longer than I will live, you know? And it doesn't mean that I have to have my pretty pictures around forever or whatever. It's more like I want to help to shift people's lives for the better, if at all possible, which is extremely idealistic in all of these things.
I agree. I mean, you know, to be fair, it's always a struggle, isn't it? To be like, I think there's something to be said that we fed the idea that daring to dream about a different world is somehow ludicrous. That isn't realistic. I think especially like a person who's driven like you, and I think to a bigger or lesser extent every of us, because we can do it easily just within our own unit of a family or friends or whatever group. I think we can change things little, even if it's a little bit. It's still a type of imprint and change. So, I know exactly where you're coming from, but yeah, I think it's good to be daring. I think it's very good what you're doing. And yeah, how do you feel like? I know that there is a need of saying, maybe that's idealistic, but I have a feeling like perhaps as a person who tends to know very well what they want or kind of see the trajectory, I think that perhaps you're more realistic about that. Rather, you clearly.
I think those things have to work together in order to progress anything. Probably. I don't know if I fully answered how I think I come across. I guess I don't really care. Yeah, like I just want to give information that's not going to be too like security prone for me. And I want to give people an insight into the world as bare as it can be, because I want a sex worker to have a voice as opposed to somebody else speaking to me. And the rest, I don't really mind, which is why I guess I ask you how things are coming across. When people are saying, oh, I really like listening to you because you're confident or whatever, I didn't think that was going to be a thing. It's just something that I now hear, or it makes me feel this or that. I never really thought that. I guess I think of myself as a resource, and I want to think of myself as a resource, and how people perceive that, I don't have any control.
Oh, it is a resource in many ways.
Yeah.
Sometimes in ways that I know exactly what you're talking about, the type of resource you're talking about, especially, making sex workers visible and human, right? And raising awareness around that, and potentially a platform that can help to, change things, to make the society more accepting and better. It's so weird that as humans, we dehumanize other people who are also humans. So, and that the work needs to be done to bring them back that respect and humanity that they have. But I think you are a resource, when people say, oh, I listen to you because you're confident, that's an emotional resource. So, and that's partially also part of being a sex worker, because you create emotional space, right? So it's a resource in many ways, informational, and I think you strike a really nice balance between, dropping saucy details that people are curious about and oh, that's naughty, I'm going to listen to it. And then at the same time being very informative and, having perspective on things. So that, I would say that even though, yes, you do share quite a lot of intimate details, from your profession, obviously, not necessarily from super personal life always. I think it serves a function almost of, being a chili sprinkled on top of dark chocolate, right? It's kind of like you've got this nutritional value there in the black chocolate, right? That is dark chocolate, very nice to, supposedly healthy.
Yeah.
And then you just spice it up, so people oh, that's different.
Okay.
So it does fulfill the function.
Thank you for all the very detailed and great analogies in your feedback.
I don't know if everybody's fond of black chocolate or chili, but you clearly
it depends how you feed it to them.
I'm sure that's the case.
Thank you. It's been very touching how generous you've been in terms of your insight into all of this. I didn't expect that much kindness. I thought I'd ask some questions and I'd find out some things about maybe how I could do stuff, but it's been such a deep reflection, and that's a really lovely thing.
I
based
think a
upon
lot of, especially if, not to take away from men again, I'm sure that men are, they have their own experience of life, but, if there are females listening to your podcasts too, not to idealize female just because they're female, but I think you would be surprised how many people are not sexualizing you in that context, and it's just driven purely by curiosity. And also your kindness, because yes, you're confident and you set the boundaries within your work, but you also, reflect on yourself and you say maybe I wasn't there very kind, or maybe that's the way we should treat people, or you clearly do have capacity for kindness, and that really does come across in the podcast as well.
Thank you.
And just the fact that you just invited a delusional ramble from the street on your sofa,
it was a process. Yeah. And do you feel like the things that you've heard, that you've taken with you into your day-to-day or anything like this? Or?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, it does come down to the confidence, but...
or is it just nice to just have someone to be with on a run?
Certainly.
Which is also nice, I guess, and a value too, right?
It is. And especially when I cook as well. Adds a wonderful voice to listen to when you're just chopping onion and you're crying.
Oh.
No,
very romantic.
Very romantic, especially with the onion. No, I think there is a lot of value to it, and I think it's more on the human level. There is, a great resource of you're going to Tokyo, or you're going to Berlin and talking about those stories and, you know, all those dungeons and your own experiences, like whether that's on the giving or receiving end. And I think I was very personally touched, and I think a lot of people would be, especially from female audience, when you shared your story of perhaps the unhealthy dynamic that you had with one of your romantic partners.
Wow, that one really went wild.
It doesn't have to be a celebrity for exactly the same dynamic to play out.
I know.
And
that was really intense to see how many people identified with that one. That was quite sad, actually.
And, you know, also you put yourself there in a very vulnerable position because you build your whole image on the confidence. And you, in that episode, you opened up in a way that showed that even the person who, you know, does meditating and does the work on growing on the cells for a job, does a job that plays on the idea of confidence, can have that confidence stripped down from them if they're not cherished and valued and respected. And I think that's probably something that a lot of your listeners, probably could very relate to, in a way where I think a lot of women, because the society doesn't necessarily encourage us to be confident all the time, the messaging is quite the opposite, that we should be insecure in many ways. We should try to lose weight or gain weight or, you know, do all of those body modifications. And that's great when they make people feel better, but it shouldn't be the expectation. And I think looking at someone that I think on the surface level, we would assume, oh my God, like she's got it, right? Like she's confident, like she has so much experience with men, like it's impossible. Like, you know, it's that's kind of like the confidence that I want to aspire to. And then realizing that actually on the emotional level, it's the nurturing and the trust and, you know, the good, healthy relationships, whether that's romantic or just friendships, just within our community that we have, that do help us to build that confidence. And that's something that we shouldn't be taking for granted. And I think, well, thank you for opening about that, because I think, it was a very eye-opening thing. And it really was, personally for me, it both tore me apart and at the same time was very healing.
Okay.
I guess similarly how you do in your work, that you deconstruct people and put them back together.
Is it because there was something you recognized in it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was, not with a celebrity, but exactly the same experience in my life.
I just added that to the title because I know it's good clickbait, but the reality of the story is for everyone.
It wasn't about, they also people at the end of the day, right? So we all people. Just some of us are in spotlight, some of us are just, anonymous, right? So, but a lot of those stories, and on many levels, like what that's personally relatable, what that's just, getting a laugh out of me, or, even just that curiosity. So, I think, I think there will be value in it.
Okay.
As long as you keep being curious, and I don't see that going away.
No, that's what drives me, I think. To do anything.
Yeah.
But you've been so generous in all your reflections about me. I've been doing these interviews for like a few months now for the new season, and we almost never talk about me, so I'm a bit like overwhelmed. All of these nice words. Maybe you can tell us about you to even it out a little bit. Why are you such a good communicator? When did you realize that do you know that about yourself?
I get that feedback every now and then, which is always really nice to hear.
Deeply thoughtful, like really great at actually executing thought. It's
that's very good.
Has that always been a thing?
I think, like, obviously I made my share of mistakes in life. And whenever there is like miscommunications, you learn from them. Of course, like, going to therapy, reflecting on myself, also learning foreign languages as well, because English is not my mother tongue. So, you have to kind of come to understand each word very carefully.
Okay.
And just, again, I think it's the same thing as for you. If you holding space for someone, right? It's just the way you hold space for people, and if you're able to hold space for someone, then you sort of try to communicate in good faith, I guess. And then when you do that, you're not trying to like get your way in a negative way, then I think no matter how well educated are you or not, or no matter how much vocabulary you have or not, you will try to understand the person and try to ask questions as well. So,
all good.
Sorry.
No worries. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it's a huge compliment, and obviously vice versa. I also think that about you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Whenever you interview people, or just in general, I think the way you spoke about how your interaction with your submissives. I mean, I know that nowadays you don't necessarily work in the same space that you meet people all the time in the professional capacity. But how you said that during that initial process, you would carefully listen to what they say to pick up on little details. And I think that's very telling, right? So it's also a part of communication. It can be used in different spaces, right? Just healthy communication, or just for play and fun.
And when you were doing the research, was it around communication at all, or was it more data? Or
I did all sorts of interesting things. So when I was younger, before I moved abroad, because I moved abroad to study, when I was before university, I went to art school. So I actually did like visual arts. And then I did completely something else, which was quite a funny moment for my teachers to because in art school, at the end, you have all the normal exams, but you also have to present the artwork before a committee, a panel of your teachers. And at the end, because obviously we were already graduating school, so they were asking everyone the same question of okay, so what are you planning after school? Are you working, or are you going somewhere? And I think a lot of them sort of expected that I would probably continue in the same line, because it was 6 years school, so a lot of people did. But I was like, no, I'm just gonna go off and study Japanese, because why not? Yeah, and that took them a while to sink in.
Okay, I mean, it's not for them to.
No.
Yeah.
I don't judge them. They were very kind in their own ways, right? They just didn't see it coming. And so then I spent 4 years doing that, and I lived in Tokyo for a year when I know that you traveled as well. So I also studied Japanese, and I mean, obviously over time it got a little rusty, because I don't live in Japan at the moment. And afterward, actually, funnily enough, it was Japanese that led me into finance.
Okay.
Because I come from a quite working class family, so it was as simple as needing a job, and that was actually one of the things that I found quite relatable to you when you said when I was 13, my first job was McDonald's. And I was I actually did that at uni, part-time, night shifts, just mopping up vomit after people.
Glamorous. I was working there during the days of supersize.
Oh my god.
I used to eat supersized meals for $1 or something like that.
That's dangerous, isn't it?
It's so bad for you, but it was so good.
But also the metabolism of 13-year-old.
It's amazing.
Not very good for your body still, but sorry.
Yeah.
And then so I did that. I did retail jobs and stuff. And then once I graduated from uni, I just was job hunting. And just similarly as you mentioned, as a teenager, you went through a period of not necessarily having housing stability. And that was something that I experienced after that, but after uni. So I was very, very lucky to have good friends who allowed me to, just sew for self. But if it wasn't for them, I would have been essentially homeless. And I was very lucky I was just applying for any jobs really. But the sort of first interview that I had for a proper graduate job just happened to be at a Japanese bank. It was just
in
a personal
London.
assistant. Yeah, in London. They had a small branch just for entertaining their clients. That branch actually since then closed during the pandemic. But they had it for quite a few years. It was very, very small. It was just mainly like translation and just being a personal assistant, serving tea to rich men. And then from there, I was doing a little bit of research, and then I got scouted for another job in research, but for a Swiss asset management company. And then I was working there for a little while, and then I moved there for another company that was in a similar vein, and then also worked there for about 2 years. And it was a lot to do with investment research. I was mainly on the side of the managing of the budgets for that, and sort of talking to the banks on one side, and then internally gathering feedback and talking to people internally about that. So I did learn, actually, even though I didn't perform investments myself, I did learn a lot about like different financial instruments. It's actually quite interesting in many ways. I think it's just a shame that I guess we are still moving in the right direction as a society. I just would like men to be less repressed. And I think that would translate as healthier overall dynamics, also in their working environment.
Sorry that you came up against something
I'm sure
of that sort.
Your fair share of that too, but everybody does. And it's not like it's pleasant for them either, because they equally working with the male colleagues. So they might be,
and their internal pressures.
A lot of different things.
It's nice to be out of that environment.
It is. It's very healing.
What is your environment now then?
I'm actually not doing anything at the moment. I am very, very lucky to be in a relationship that the person I'm with showed me so much kindness. And they also happen to be a man. I'm an overall pansexual, so it wouldn't necessarily have to be a man, but it happens that it's a man. But it's a person who showed me a lot of kindness when I was, in a situation where I needed that kindness. So, I mean, obviously working in finance to get to save a little bit of money as well. But my partner has an apartment where I can safely live.
You talk about writing though, right?
Yeah, I do. I do. I'm working on a book. I obviously haven't completed it yet. It's not like, it's ready for publishing.
What's it on?
It's actually a story of, again, because I'm more interested in women's stories and female voices at the moment. Thinking about, making it a female story. It's 3 women that their stories intersect. And there is one who is the main character, and it's a story. All of them are immigrants in one way or another, either first generation or generationally. And they come from different backgrounds, different professions. And the story is around them interacting with each other. And in different spaces, there is the relationship between client and a therapist. There is the relationship between a woman and a woman as a romantic relationship. And then there is the main story, overarching story of finding your path in life in a place that is not necessarily a place where you were born, and how that can impact you in different ways.
What is the world that character was born into, and what have they moved into?
So they sort of born, I think, because also those 3 women I intend them to be, when I'm writing the characters, they also have 3 different races. One is white, one is Asian, one is black. They all well educated. One is a student, one is a working professional in corporate world, and the other one is a therapist. And the main character moved from relatively unprivileged background, not unlike myself, but again, it's a fictional character, into the world that is relatively wealthy. And the sort of, disparities that you're talking about sometimes on your podcast too, and the sort of perceptions that you gain from observing that world as a third party.
From a wide range of understanding. Amazing. Yeah, I love the wide range of how you see things, and I look forward to any work that you decide to create or not.
It might be still a while, but as far I'm very happy in the position of just listening to your work.
Yeah. Well, I got to hear you speak today, and that was very touching. But is there anything else that you'd like to share as we maybe close today's thing? Actually, I have one more question. Like, do you have any experience with kink at all?
Yeah, I do. Currently, my current relationship is quite vanilla.
Okay.
But I do when I lived in Tokyo, so I tried some shibari as well.
Okay.
I think rope is wonderful, especially if you have soft one.
Yeah.
And just like as you said, like different things with. Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
With holding pleasure, telling someone perhaps how long they should withhold pleasure. Just maybe not as much on the scale as you're exposed to through your profession, but definitely more amateur things still that involve dressing up in various ways, and bondage in different ways.
Okay.
And, what that's with both. I had relationships with men and women.
How did those kind of come up?
Like kinks?
Yeah, like well, because when I started, I just sort of jumped in the deep end, right, and joined a work environment, and most people kind of incrementally come to things, and so I guess I'm always curious as to like when was the first time you thought, oh, okay, I might wear that thing, or actually I'm going to tell you not to come now.
I think for me it actually started quite early on. And I know that you mentioned that you went through a phase where you were sort of interested in hentai.
You really listen, yeah.
I do. And funnily enough, I think I might have been really young, like 10. I had like a semi-accidental exposure to that, and and I think like that world has some really interesting things.
Oh yeah, it's designed to be interesting.
It's designed not to be vanilla. There is obviously
fantastical.
It's a lot of weird things, but also exciting things as well. So I think like I was pretty much like dropped into like
the infinite possibilities.
Exactly, and then I was like, because it's also like again, I really appreciate porn performance, but I am not necessarily a consumer of porn as much as I am a consumer of books that porn stars, right? And I do, purchase them from the websites and just read them because again, how their minds work. And I have nothing against them performing; it's part of the work. It's just again for me, similar as for you, the visuals of it just didn't do much for me. I am more of a like audio person, and just. Comic thing, I think when your early exposure is more with a comic, that introduces a certain type of realm, right?
Yeah.
And especially if it's like drawn in a way, like there's something, it depends also how the aesthetics of it, but like some of them are actually very aesthetically pleasant as well, which, the normal video can or cannot be like, it depends on the video, right? But with real humans in real life and normal medium of video, it can get quite messy and you're very exposed to that messiness of a human being, like, sweating and all the bodily fluids. But I think because if something is drawn, there's like an element of removal from that. It feels in a way, even if something that is happening there, it's, maybe not necessarily sanitized.
It's actual fantasy.
Yeah,
it's more realist, like understood by your brain that it's fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like actual sexual encounters, I was a relatively late bloomer. I just waited pretty much until I was like 20. I had maybe like some kissing and stuff before then, but I was a very late bloomer in comparison to some of my peers. But once I bloomed. So and I had my share of fun then. And
what was your approach to sexuality? Like, did you ever hesitate around it, or when you say you really bloomed, what do you mean?
I think like I had the experience of like first love, and I'm still in touch with that person.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, they're a lovely person.
Mm-mm.
It just didn't work out, and I'm glad that it didn't, because I've changed a lot since then. I'm also glad that my first experience is like adult experiences were with that person, because they were very respectful.
Okay.
But it was very much like, for me, it was like, oh yeah, like that person is the one. And then once, obviously, it's a classic experience. I think a lot of people experience that. Once that fell apart, I was like, well, maybe that's my opening, seeing that, you know, that isn't necessarily the one.
Let's drag up the search history.
Yes, yeah. So I was like, you know, I had that search history. It's actually a funny story with that person, because they ordered like a photo album. They also were interested in Japan, and they lived there as well. And they ordered, there is this famous / infamous Japanese photographer called Araki, and I think he photographed a lot of places in, you know, 70s and 80s with sex workers and so on. And but I think that person had a slightly different concept of what the photographs might have been once they had the album and they opened the album. Even though we were already like broken up, they called me up and they were like, I've got something that you might want.
Oh yeah.
Because like, if my, like, and they were like almost 30, and I was like, but if my mom finds it, I was like, so I'm not sure what you're saying there, but I'll gladly accept this gift.
Oh.
Yeah, so I always had that streak with me. But yeah, I just went to town after that breakup for a little while.
All right.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it was fun. It was not fun. It was both. Yeah.
And do you feel like you crave kink in your days now? Or?
Yeah, sometimes I do, but I also, you know, I think like there is so many aspects to a relationship that you come to value that person as a person. And in this specific setup, I am in a monogamous relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean that I would exclude polyamory or anything like that. This is my experience at the moment. And yeah, sometimes I do, but also I am one of those people that is like, I quite often have, because, you know, I'm a person who's quite curious, therefore a judgment place is quite low on my list of priorities. So I'm quite often that person that my friends would call up and be like, okay, so what look do I get? You know, like in the shower. And like they obviously going through different stages in their lives. Yeah. Sometimes they're going through exploring kink and stuff. So
you're a resource also.
It's in a way, but, you know, in a very like more limited and private way, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Amazing. Oh, and one thing do you ever share the podcast with people you know?
I do. I actually shared it with a couple of my friends.
Okay.
One of them is also into kink, and they for the longest time identified as gay, but I think recently they came to a realization that they might be pansexual.
Okay.
Yeah, and I definitely shared some of the episodes.
Like privately, normally?
Yeah, probably just I don't, because I don't really have a presence on social media. If I did, I probably would share it with other people. But yeah, just mainly with friends. Like, and I played actually one of your episodes as well, or maybe even two, to my partner as well, just in the car when we were driving somewhere. So,
do you remember which one?
I think they were like the AI companion.
Okay, yeah.
Like, you know, he's into tech and stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that one, and I think there was another one. I can't remember which one it was, but definitely the AI one.
Yeah, I'm curious because of, I mean, not all the episodes are sexualized, but I am particularly perceived as a sexualized thing, even if I don't. And so I just wonder how much people are open to sharing it with people in their lives, or whether it's their little secret.
I think there's
probably a mix. Both. Yeah, probably a mix. Yeah,
and I think it depends what sort of person you are and what sort of friends you are. Because like for some people, will be like, "Oh, it's my little dirty secret. I'm keeping it to myself." Some people will be like, "Oh, look how cool I am!"
Oh,
like, listen to this like super open stuff, right? And then there is this group of
sharing
people who are just like golden retrievers that are excited about anything everywhere. So it's just
my target market.
Yeah. I think actually, I think that, again, I can't speak for men, but I think a lot of women probably would be willing
open to share. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm very grateful for everything you've shared and for the deep, deep thought that you've put into everything. It's really, I feel very honored to be on the receiving end of all of your feedback. And I'm going to let it sit, and it will definitely shape my way forward. So hopefully you will continue liking the podcast. And thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as you probably know, I always say thank you for listening, and speak with you next.